pardon me, it was resuming debate. The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be sharing my time with the member from Saint-Bruno-Saint-Hubert. And I'm very pleased to speak on the issue of rail safety this afternoon. It's a very important issue for my riding, which I'll explain shortly. But we are debating second reading of Bill C-52, which will amend the Canada Transportation Act and Railway Safety Act. And this is something that's closely watched by people in my community, in my riding of Parkdale High Park. What this bill would do is require minimum insurance levels for railways transporting dangerous goods based on the type and volume of goods being transported. It establishes a disaster relief fund paid for by levies on railway companies that are transporting crude oil to compensate victims of derailments on top of the minimum insurance levels. And it would implement some other changes to increase the powers of inspectors. In general, let me begin by saying, Mr. Speaker, that we support this bill. We think it's important to take immediate action, and any improvement is certainly possible. Is certainly positive. We need to improve the liability and accountability regime for Canada's railways, and we need to ensure that the government enforces the legislation, that the regulations are enforced, and that the inspectors and auditors have the resources required for this effective oversight. We do believe that this bill should have gone much further, but I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. Certainly what got everyone's attention in this country on the issue of rail safety was the terrible, tragic rail disaster in Lac-Mégantic in 2013. It's a situation that we know well, where a freight train loaded with Bakken crude oil ran down a hill, it was unattended. It derailed, and on impact it exploded, caught fire, killed 47 people. The town centre was destroyed. 800 people were evacuated. The land was contaminated, and it was a traumatic situation, not only for the people who were horribly directly affected by the devastation, but I think for our entire country. And what the subsequent reports found, and they made a number of findings and a number of recommendations, but that basically that what had happened beginning back in the 90s with the Liberal governments, continuing with subsequent Conservative governments, was the deregulation of the railway sector and a transferring of responsibility for safety from the government to the railway companies themselves. And in this particular case, with the company that was responsible in Lac-Mégantic, they found a series of problems, but very weak culture of safety, mechanical problems, lack of staffing, and they found with Transport Canada itself inadequate oversight and inspection. And certainly what was highlighted was the weakness of the tank cars. I think it's fair to say that people assumed the government was looking out for them and taking care of their safety, that this was surely one of the basic responsibilities of government, was to make sure that public safety was respected. I want to read into the record in the House a letter I received, an email from a constituent, because this got the attention of people in our riding of Parkdale High Park. And one neighbourhood in our riding is called the Junction. And it is the junction, the crossing of the CN and CP lines. And so as you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, there's quite a bit of rail traffic going through our neighbourhood. Now, this was historically an industrial neighbourhood, which over the years has seen a greater number of people with their homes right by the tracks. So I want to read from a constituent. My partner and I currently own and live, and I won't give the address, but on a street beside the tracks. Our property backs onto the rail yard. Our bedroom is less than 40 feet from the rails that transport tons and tons of goods, many of which are unknown to us. We see black oil tankers go by multiple times a day, cars with perforated holes in them. Since the Lac Mégantic catastrophe, as well as others across the country, they seem to be happening more and more frequently. We are deeply concerned for our safety as well as the safety of our neighbours and friends. Because of our home's proximity to the rail lines, if anything were ever to happen on the rail lines behind us, a derailment or an explosion, we would most likely lose our home and potentially our lives. The number of lives that could be at risk if such an accident occurred here is absolutely staggering. So this is a concern that is very, very real in our neighbourhood, Mr. Speaker, and it goes well beyond the issue about liability. While liability is a key factor, because we saw in Lac Mégantic there was clearly a lack of responsibility, a lack of liability on the part of the shipper. But we have a number of questions from members of our community who have organized into an organization called Safe Rail Communities. They want to know why, when the technology to stabilize light crude oil exists by extraction of volatile gases, while this technology exists and is mandated in the state of Texas, why is it not required to be stabilized before it is transported by rail? Most of this is required to be stabilized before it is transported by pipeline. So they want the substances that are being transported made as safe as possible. They also want to know why Canadians must wait till 2025 for the new TC-117 tank cars, the safer tank cars. Why do people have to continue to see the DOT 111s or even the newer cars that crashed in Northern Ontario? Why they have to see these roll past their bedroom windows when there are safer alternatives? Why do we have to wait 10 years for safer tank cars to roll through the Canadian lines? And why can't people know what in fact is being transported through their communities? Why don't people have a right to know the hazards that are rolling right past their bedroom windows? They believe these are fundamental questions that need to be answered, Mr. Speaker. And they also want to know when a catastrophic accident from a flammable train could, in a densely populated area, could have costs going up to $6 billion. Why is the strictest requirement only $1 billion? In fact, CN has told us, because we've written to them, that they already have more than $1 billion in liability insurance, so this puts no new higher standard on them. Why don't we require shippers to, and those responsible for the products that are being shipped, in fact, to have insurance that covers the complete liability? Why would we allow any exposure to liability in our communities? Think of the potential tragedy of a major rail accident in our largest city, in the city of Toronto, where hundreds and hundreds of these tank cars carrying Bakken oil or dilbit are transferred every day. Surely we need to prevent as much as possible any potential accident from happening. People want to know that what is being shipped is as safe as possible, that it's being shipped at speeds as slow as possible, that wherever possible it's rerouted from their area to less populated neighborhoods. But then, should there be any tragedy, that the community is not going to once again have to pick up the price. So, Mr. Speaker, protecting the public is a core responsibility of government. New Democrats believe we need to do everything in our power to ensure that tragedies such as that which occurred in Lac Mégantic never happen again. Fixing liability is just the beginning. We need stronger laws, stronger enforcement, penalty for those who break them, and much more serious oversight, inspections, and audits by this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire, l'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Gaspésie-Île-de-la-Madeleine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for her speech. I think that she raised a number of very important points. I'd like to go back to the issue of standards for the .11 cars, which have been replaced by the new standard with new cars. And as she said, we've already seen a couple of derailments in Northern Ontario since that announcement, and another 3 derailments in the United States with the new standards. I think that people are right to be concerned. Does the bill do anything when it comes to protecting the public when it comes to the quality of the tanker cars that go right by their homes? Does the bill give us hope that we will have a standard that holds up? The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park. Thank you for the question. And our constituents have been asking us, why do we have to wait 10 years to have tanker cars that are safer, that are stronger? Because we've seen that the better tanker cars announced by the federal government have already, well, we've seen that they're not strong enough. The 1232s, these are the tankers that broke open in derailments in Northern Ontario. And so for those who live near the railways, they're very concerned that the standards are not strict enough and that the government must do much more to protect the public.
Questions and comments? L'honorable...
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague a question that is similar to that, or a parallel question when it comes to the speed of trains on the railways. I saw a convoy of these oil tankers at a very high speed. It seemed to me to be too high. Does she know if slower speeds for rail convoys are planned for urban areas? Because the higher the speed, the higher risk of an explosion. So I'd like to hear the member on that question.
Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park. Thank you for the question. It's true, if the cars are traveling slower, there's a lower risk. The government says that in downtowns, the cars are going to travel slower, but people living near the railway report that, especially at night, the trains are moving very fast. And people are very concerned that at those high speeds, in major cities especially, there's a much higher likelihood of accident, and particularly of a serious accident. So if those trains are going to keep traveling through our cities and all across the country, they have to slow down in order to maximize public safety.